If you've spent any time with history, you know this. Wars on metaphorical ideas are destined to fail. Take Reagan's war on drugs, Bush's war on terror, or even President Biden's undeclared war to eradicate cancer. On paper, these battles seem winnable. Drugs can be intercepted at the border, terror threats dismantled by the military, and cancer treated with intense medical firepower. But in reality, mobilizing the military often makes things worse. The military's involvement along the southern border shows that no country can fully seal its borders against illicit drugs. Drone strikes and troop deployments have been proven to fuel the next generation of terrorists. The Center for Strategic and International Studies found drone strikes increase anti-US sentiment and radicalization, and a 2020 study showed terrorists often ramp up attacks right after deadly strikes. Terrorism isn't a physical enemy. It's an idea, born in shadows and spread among the powerless. Karl von Clausewitz once said, "War is the continuation of politics by other means." While Mao Zedong added, "Politics is war without bloodshed. War is politics with bloodshed." No one can kill their way through an idea, even one as dangerous as Al-Qaeda's goals against the US. Yet politicians keep declaring war on ideas, despite Victor Hugo's reminder that one resists the invasion of armies. One does not resist the invasion of ideas. Reagan lost his war on drugs. Bush never got to say mission accomplished in the war on terror, and Biden will likely never see cancer eradicated in his lifetime. Different tools might have worked better. Portugal's decriminalization and education programs cut drug-related deaths by 75%. Combating poverty, President Lyndon B. Johnson's war has proved more effective as stopping radicalization. And over half of all cancers could be prevented by simple lifestyle changes, such as exercise, avoiding tobacco, and sunscreen. Declaring war on an idea is like flooring the gas only to crash into a dead end. Why do so many leaders keep making this mistake? The answer is complicated. War is a state of exception. Morality fades and war policies overshadow everyday laws. American presidents can only serve 8 years, but losing a war often cuts that short. Wars on ideas drag on far beyond a single term. Politicians know they don't have to finish the fight, they just need to start it. And with no clear enemy crossing a line, they get their moment in the spotlight, their policies, and millions of dollars without ever having to succeed. So be skeptical when a politician declares war on an idea. But there is one case where that phrase fits. A brutal, bloody example. The Philippines under President Rodrigo Duterte. He built his entire campaign on a promise to kill anyone selling or using drugs. America's gotten used to tough talk from politicians like Trump, but most of the time it's bluster, not literal truth. Duterte wasn't kidding. At a campaign rally, he said, "When I become president, I'll tell the military and police, find these people and kill them. Period." He meant it, and he led from the front. Up to 30,000 people may have died during his 6 years in office. Looking at his motives, how he co-opted the police, and the lasting damage to the Philippines reveals the real danger of a populist language, especially when aimed at society's most vulnerable. You're listening to Empires, Anarchy, and Other Notable Moments, a podcast designed for deep dives that assist in the teaching of history. This series focuses upon the relationship between the United States and its first colony, the Philippines. Episode number 5, The Duterte Death Squads. previous episodes in this series focused mostly on how other nations, especially the United States and Spain, shaped the Philippines through their long periods of colonization. Those stories are examples of causality. While this podcast often explains how the past shapes the present, causality is also a powerful predictor of the future. Though the Philippines is 8,000 miles from the American homeland, its experience, shaped by an American-style justice system, political structure, and way of life, offers us a kind of multiversal science experiment. If you remember anything from science class, a good experiment needs a control, a factor that stays unchanged so that you can compare the results. I'm writing this in late summer 2024, just as the U.S. presidential election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris hits the 100-day mark. Immigration has become the Republican Party's centerpiece issue, demonizing migrants at every turn. This isn't just my take. Rolling Stone ran a piece titled "Trump's RNC Revels in Graphic Demonization of Migrants." The article describes the crowd's reaction as they listen to Republican speakers lay out lurid, horrifying tales. The delegates cheered, hissed, chanted, and even fist-pumped, conditioned by years of Fox News and right-wing media feeding them stories of border chaos. Signs waved saying, "Stop Biden's border bloodbath." Senator Ted Cruz declared, "Americans are dying, murdered, assaulted, raped by illegal immigrants that the Democrats have released." House Speaker Mike Johnson warned that the millions of illegal aliens crossing the border would harm our citizens, drain our resources, or disrupt our elections. And Representative Steve Scalise claimed Biden and Harris want illegals to vote now that they've opened the border. But the facts tell a different story. The border is not open. Half of all undocumented immigrants entered legally, through airports and other official ports of entry, then overstayed their visas. And most immigrants, whether legal or not, are just trying to build a better life. There are teachers, farm workers, engineers, and small business owners. John Oliver put it best on Last Week Tonight, saying, "There is no migrant crime wave happening right now. In fact, there is no crime wave at all. Crime in general has been trending downward." Experts agree there's no link between immigration status and crime. Texas, the only state tracking immigrant crime rates, found illegal immigrants are convicted at a rate 45% below native-born Americans. Oliver concluded, because there is no data to back up claims of a migrant crime wave, they've had to resort to anecdotes and exaggeration. Sure, 4 violent crimes committed by undocumented immigrants have made headlines recently, but cherry-pick any group's worst examples and you can villainize them too. Take babies, for example. Once beloved, they've been cast as society's scourge, resource strains unleashing waves of killings. Here are some toddler crime incidents from early 2024. In Wilsonboro, Pennsylvania, a 3-year-old shot a 33-year-old woman in the back. In Hampton, Virginia, a toddler shot his 1-year-old sibling, allegedly triggered by a strobe light. In Nashville, a 25-year-old woman was shot and killed after entering a 3-year-old's home. The examples go on. NBC News reports that nearly every day a child unintentionally fires a gun and injures or kills someone. It's one of the most preventable forms of gun violence, but it's not easy to solve. Obviously, I'm being tongue-in-cheek to make a point. These are tragic accidents, but no one concludes babies are evil monsters out to destroy civilization. What we do question are the gun laws and the adults who failed to secure their firearms. The Republican Party uses a few tragic crimes to paint all migrants as dangerous others. This demonization has real consequences. Violence against migrants is rising, though we haven't yet seen Civil War-level chaos, such as the lynching of freedmen in America's past. It might seem unimaginable today, but the Philippines offers a mirror to what could happen. Instead of migrants, Duterte's regime demonized drug dealers, with results the Washington Post called a genocide of dehumanized drug users. Rodrigo Duterte's story is one of privilege gone wrong. Foreign Affairs described him as the son of a provincial governor on Mindanao, a southern Philippine island. Like many children of the Philippine elite, he grew up privileged, surrounded by guns and bodyguards, flying his father's plane and mingling with the sons of local notables at a Jesuit boys' school. Patricia Evangelista, whose book Some People Need Killing is our main source for this episode. She gives us a front row seat to the brutal reality journalists often face. She was suddenly tasked with covering Duterte's drug war, working amid corpses every night at the height of the killing. Evangelista paints Duterte as a wild child who wanted the world to know it. The good, clean fun of his schoolmates wasn't for him. He chose his own crowd, danced with bar girls, drank with his father's police bodyguards, joined gangs, bought guns, failed classes, got stabbed, was expelled, shipped away by his mother, lectured by his father. Basically a troubled, privileged son, which he was. How did a man with such a background become president? Partly because of his record fighting drugs as mayor, but mostly because of how privilege works in the Philippines. His father was a popular two-term governor and later served in Ferdinand Marcos' national cabinet. When his father died of a heart attack, it seemed like a turning point for Duterte, pushing him to pursue a law degree. Trouble followed him, though, including the infamous shooting of his fraternity brother. The truth remains a guarded secret, but 3 versions exist. One says it was an accidental roughhousing accident. Another suggests an old-fashioned duel where the victim's gun jammed while Duterte's fired. And the third claims it was a premeditated attempt on his life, with Duterte lying in wait. The victim survived, and Duterte's privilege shielded him. The worst punishment was missing his graduation ceremony walk. That lack of consequences only fueled Duterte's unrepentant attitude. He even bragged, telling one group, "I was about to graduate from San Beda when I shot a man. I waited for him. I said, I'll put him in his place." Bang. One of my favorite American politicians is Dr. Ben Carson, the former neurosurgeon who once led the prestigious Johns Hopkins Medical School. Fun fact, I even had a relative of his in one of my classes during my teaching career. Sadly, I never managed to leverage that connection enough to get him to speak to the class. Maybe that's because I've often called Dr. Carson the smartest dumb person I've ever seen. Despite his groundbreaking work, like safely separating conjoined twins, he regularly spouted baffling nonsense while running for president in 2016 as a Republican candidate. If you've never seen it, check out the viral YouTube clip titled "Ben Carson Forgets His Luggage." Mid-interview, he suddenly remembers he left his luggage behind and literally runs off camera to retrieve it, leaving the confused interviewer hanging. It's one of those moments you just can't make up. I bring up Carson not just for comic relief to lighten the grim reality of what's essentially a genocide of dehumanized drug users, but because he tried to toughen up his image for Republican voters by claiming in his book that he once stabbed a friend. This was a pre-election reveal, a classic American political tactic where candidates get ahead of their skeletons before the press digs them up as October surprises. George Bush confessed to being an alcoholic. Barack Obama admitted to trying cocaine. Joe Biden fessed up to plagiarizing a law school paper. Carson's stab at redemption was in the same vein. Unfortunately for Carson, his "I stabbed a dude" story was completely false. he couldn't find a single person willing to back it up. The aim was twofold: present himself as a gritty redemption story, going from throwing rocks, bricks, baseball bats, and hammers to earning degrees at Yale and Johns Hopkins, and counter Donald Trump's claim that he had super low energy. No one who knew Carson bought the story. It was just a massive overreaction to Trump's jab. Meanwhile, Rodrigo Duterte's claims about shooting his frat brother were far more believable. I like to think Americans rejected Carson for both revealing and then lying about stabbing someone, but realistically, he was never a serious challenger to Trump's rise. Similarly, Duterte openly bragged about shooting a fraternity brother, and that didn't stop his ascent. When the corrupt Marcos regime fell, several national heroes emerged, including Duterte's mother, Soledad Duterte. Like most moms, she was worried about the warning signs around her son. Soledad was a national hero in the Yellow Friday movement and a former teacher. Offered the vice mayor seat of Davao City, she declined at the last minute, suggesting her son take the post instead. Privileged and connected 41-year-old Rodrigo Duterte, then an assistant city prosecutor, was appointed vice mayor of the Philippines' largest city. Davao is a major economic hub for the island, with modern infrastructure powering the island's manufacturing and commerce. Within 2 years, Duterte won election as the city's mayor, a position he would hold for 22 years. That long tenure let him mold Davao into his vision, a platform that propelled him all the way to the presidency. Why has Trump singled out migrants to demonize? No one really knows, aside from it being a political talking point that works for him. Duterte, though, is an open book. Evangelista traces Duterte's hatred of drug users to a disturbing story the former president repeated throughout his career. I'll soften the language a bit here, but if you're squeamish about violence and sexual assault, brace yourself. This part is graphic. Evangelista writes, depending upon where you start the story, it begins with a goat. I'll give it to you raw, the president said. Back when he was mayor, there was a Christmas party, a family reunion in rural Mandung, Davao City. People got together, he said, and this addict showed up. He saw his sister carrying her baby daughter and said, "So this is my niece." The niece was 18 months old. The uncle picked up the baby. He said she was pretty, prettier than her mother. The party went on until the mother realized her baby was missing. They found her the next morning on the riverbank, dead, belly torn open. Police caught the uncle and held him at the station. The mayor stormed in and asked why. His answer, Duterte said, "That's just how I am, Mayor. Sometimes when I've got no one to bleep, I end up bleeping the goats." Evangelista continues. What the uncle said may be true, or maybe Duterte imagined it. What's certain is that in the early 1990s, a dead baby was found by the river in Mandung, where the city's dirt roads give way to small farms. It happened in December. Journalists who were there remember how Duterte burst into the police station, sent them out, and the sounds of his fists pounding the plywood walls. When he emerged, his knuckles were red and bruised. The rest of the story is honestly hard for me to fully grasp. On one hand, I get it. The crime Rodrigo Duterte described is beyond heinous. While I'm not a strong supporter of the death penalty, I do believe there are cases where it's appropriate, particularly for those who show zero remorse and are likely to reoffend. Some of the strongest people I know are those who, despite enduring unspeakable tragedies, find the strength to forgive the perpetrators. Mothers who have lost children, families of school shooting victims, tragically all too common in America today, and survivors of the Holocaust, the ultimate example of unimaginable mass violence. I'm not sure I could show that same strength, and honestly hope I never have to find out. I've been fortunate to have only positive experiences with migrants. Nearly every individual I've met who chooses to move to my country has been uplifting and inspiring. So I find the GOP's demonization of migrants not only deceptive, but frankly unbelievable. When it comes to drugs, however, my experience is far more direct. I've seen friends, former students, and even relatives struggle with addiction. This has led to far too many funerals, visits to incarcerated loved ones, and a lot of painful reflection on whether I could have helped alter their path. At the same time, I've also witnessed remarkable stories of recovery. People who managed to escape addiction and now dedicate their lives to helping others do the same. In that sense, I understand Duterte's impulse to demonize drug dealers and pushers. But I also know that murdering addicts, whether through the judicial system or extrajudicially, is not the answer. Ending an addict's life means ending their chance at redemption, a chance that hundreds of millions around the world have claimed and won. As Evangelista recounted, no one knows for certain the truth behind this particular origin story of Duterte's war on drugs. It may well have happened, and the mayor was understandably disturbed by it. However, there are signs reported by Eric Gayut in his work Alsa Massa Freedom Fighters or Death Squads that Duterte's war on drugs simply co-opted an existing framework of violence that had long been in place. Gayat explains that until 1986, Davao City served as a testing ground for the new People's Army's urban operations. Its large slum area was run by a revolutionary government and nicknamed Nicaragdao, a play on Nicaragua. At the peak of communist influence, NPA partisans known as Sparrows carried out liquidations of police officers with impunity. Killings, whether by the NPA, right-wing groups, or criminals, averaged 2 to 3 per day. In 1986 alone, over 40 government and police officials were killed or died in confrontations with the NPA. Duterte, shaped by the city's complex dynamics and his own privilege, faced a multifaceted battleground. The Sydney Morning Herald described Davao as a microcosm of all the Philippines' problems: high birth rates, land shortages, gambling and prostitution rackets, corrupt police and military, and of course the NPA, whose Marxist zeal often masked brutal thuggery. The U.S., in the throes of the Cold War against the Soviet Union, fully supported crackdowns on communist organizations. Duterte, who took office in 1988, praised the anti-Marxist vigilante groups, dismissing their killings as isolated incidents and promising government support, stating, "Without the support of the government, the Alsa Massa would collapse." Thus, Duterte inherited and embraced a model of government-sponsored extrajudicial killings, a model that had been largely effective against communist insurgents. The city's residents, steeped in Cold War propaganda that painted all Marxists as lawless and godless, largely accepted these covert actions. Duterte merely redirected these forces toward a new target. A police officer and self-described death squad leader testified, "In the beginning, we targeted drug addicts, pushers, snatchers, hold-uppers, and other criminals. Later, however, we were ordered by Mayor Duterte to kill his personal and political enemies. We became like hired killers, murdering not only criminals, but innocent people. These vigilantes became known as the DDS, Davao Death Squads, or Duterte Death Squads, depending upon who you asked." By 2005, reports of their actions surfaced internationally, with at least 84 vigilante-style killings in the first 3 months alone. The U.S. began connecting the DDS to Duterte that year. Publicly, the mayor engaged in a calculated doublespeak, applauding the vigilantes while insisting his support was for public consumption and wouldn't influence police conduct. Though substantial evidence, including sworn testimony from hitmen who met Duterte personally, links him to the violence, he never needed to give direct orders. Simply ensuring police ignored the killings was enough to enable them. This willingness to look the other way recalls a dark chapter in American history. Lynching was not confined to the South. In 1930, two men of color, Thomas Shipp and Abraham Smith, were lynched in Marion, Indiana. A chilling photograph captured not only their mutilated bodies, but also the smiling white crowd celebrating the crime, a horrifying testament to the collective blindness of their own cruelty. In Elgin, Illinois, a muralist recreated part of that photograph, sparking controversy. Dr. Philip Dalton, an art history professor, explained that the artist aimed to shame white people at large for race terror, using the artwork to amplify community values and confront the legacy of terror meant to control and intimidate marginalized groups. Similarly, residents of Davao either ignored the murders or openly supported the vigilantes, who targeted drug dealers already dehumanized as predatory and dangerous. Professor Tennille Brown writes in Frontiers in Psychology that throughout history, dehumanized groups are seen not as individuals, but as a mindless cluster deserving moral outrage and punishment. Drug addicts, she notes, often rate as the lowest of the low, triggering disgust due to their perceived unpredictability and lack of agency, sometimes on a subconscious level. As long as the killers targeted unknown bad guys, the public supported them. Outrage came only when families lost loved ones to the DDS, finding their bodies marked with cardboard signs accusing them of crimes. Duterte publicly embraced the policy, declaring, "I don't mind us being called the murder capital of the Philippines as long as those being killed are the bad guys. And if you're doing illegal activity in my city, you are a legitimate target of assassination." As the policy expanded and co-opted the police, the DDS grew. Human Rights Watch reported in 2009 that most DDS members fell into two groups: former NPA sparrows who surrendered, and young men with criminal records and nowhere else to go, offered the choice to join the killers or become victims. Payments to hitmen were openly issued, sometimes with Duterte's signature. On one occasion, the mayor himself emptied a magazine at a fleeing thief, teaching the police to fear him. Local media tried to expose the DDS, with the Coalition Against Summary Executions blaming the squad for 1,424 deaths between 1998 and 2015. Notably, killings dipped during the mayor's 2-year hiatus from Davao's top job due to term limits. That Duterte was re-elected shows widespread public approval for actions increasingly linked to him. The DDS developed notorious methods, carrying 2 guns, one for killing, the other to plant on victims to justify the murders. Former members have shared chilling testimonies. One recalled a cop shoving a bleeding man into a swamp, alive long enough to see the approaching crocodiles. Duterte decided to run for president in 2016, and opposition research immediately focused on linking him to the thousands of unsolved murders in Davao. Witnesses emerged, including a former police master sergeant who proclaimed, "The Davao death squad is real. I was one of those who started it. We implemented the personal instructions of Mayor Duterte to us. Such testimony, however, was almost unnecessary. In 2015, then presidential candidate Duterte himself issued a statement. Am I the death squad? True. That is true. The acronym DDS transformed itself during the campaign. Supporters embraced its association, forming groups like Digong Duerte supporters and diehard Duerte supporters. Duarte was crystal clear about his intentions, warning, "I'm telling the Filipino people, it's going to be bloody, because I will not sit there as a president and just like any other regime say, that's all I can do. If you put me there, do not screw with me." His campaign bore remarkable similarities to that of Donald Trump, who had also emerged as a more serious political figure after years of public theatrics and controversy. Trump's rise began with the racist and unfounded birther conspiracy, claiming that President Barack Obama, a Hawaiian-born American citizen, was ineligible for the presidency. Reportedly, the ridicule Trump received, particularly at the 2011 White House Correspondents' Dinner, where comedian Seth Meyers lampooned him, sparked a deeper desire for political vengeance. In the Philippines, it was Amazing Grace Poe, a dual citizen who led early presidential polls. Her candidacy faced a legal challenge on constitutional grounds. When the Philippine Supreme Court upheld her eligibility by a narrow 5-4 vote, Duterte responded with xenophobic indignation. "I will not accept an American president," he said. He formally entered the race 6 months before the election, announcing, "The die is cast. I have crossed the Rubicon." He added ominously, "Rubicon is a bridge heading to the slaughter." Duterte won, despite widespread documentation of his connection to thousands of extrajudicial killings. His success in part stemmed from disbelief. Many voters simply didn't take his threats seriously. Adolf Hitler's theory of the big lie, described in Mein Kampf, explains how outlandish claims can gain credibility through their sheer audacity. As Hitler wrote, "In the big lie, there is always a certain force of credibility. They more readily fall victim to the big lie than the small lie. Even though the facts may be brought clearly to their minds, they will still doubt and waver." Sheila Coronel and Evangelista both highlight how voters rationalize Duterte's logic. One supporter, named Jason, believed that Filipinos are gullible folk, always willing to leap onto the next bandwagon. He assumed Duterte's talk of murder, drugs, and tossing corpses into Manila Bay was just theater for the media. Jason believed he was in on the joke, that he understood the political game, and that others didn't. Despite the controversy, Duterte respected the formal process of democratic elections. His 2016 victory is widely accepted as the result of a fair and free election. Voter turnout hit 81%, and Duterte captured 40% of the vote in a 5-way race. The global press immediately turned its attention to the promises he made as mayor and planned to scale nationally. The Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada summarized his rise this way. Political dynasties and members of the country's elite dominated the polls of Asia's oldest democracy, with one glaring exception. Within less than a day after voting officially ended, Maverick City Mayor and political firebrand Rodrigo Duterte secured an overwhelming victory. This triumph of a relative outsider from the southern Philippines was a critical rebuke of the country's political establishment. Duterte's electoral mandate comes from the collective rage of Philippines against the status quo, but also from their unshakable faith that, as a catalyst for change, Duterte could curb criminality, inequality, and corruption. In other words, Rodrigo Duterte was the change candidate, and his top promise was simple: to protect Filipinos from the horrors of the world, chief among them, drug addiction. Like many nations, the Philippines has a serious drug problem. The drug of choice is crystal meth, shabu, a highly addictive substance that floods the brain with dopamine and produces a short-lived sense of euphoria and productivity. Although users often believe they can manage their intake, crystal meth quickly hijacks the brain's reward system, making it difficult to feel pleasure from anything else. In response, the Global Health Program of the Association of Pacific Rim Universities convened 167 experts across 21 disciplines to assess the problem. Their findings were clear. Deep economic inequality had pushed many Filipinos toward drug use as a means of escape. A truly effective policy would target both the supply of illegal drugs and the root causes, poverty and joblessness. Indeed, a crackdown was necessary, but not to the extreme degree that Duterte envisioned. In 2017, the same association noted drug trafficking syndicates and small-scale peddlers operated with relative impunity in many parts of the country. Corruption within law enforcement and the judiciary further exacerbated the problem, allowing the drug trade to flourish. A public safety theory known as broken windows suggests that visible disorder, like vandalism or urban blight, leads to increased crime if left unaddressed. The idea is that small signs of decay invite bigger problems. But the Philippines, as a developing country, lacks the institutional capacity to repair its broken windows. Although illicit drug use is comparable to that in the United States, the Philippines has far fewer resources for healthcare, law enforcement, and addiction recovery. Rehabilitation programs are scarce, and social services remain deeply underfunded. Duterte failed to uphold the broader responsibilities of national leadership because he was, in effect, a one-trick candidate. Philosopher Abraham Maslow's law of the instrument captures this flaw. If the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. Immediately upon taking office, Duterte began wielding that hammer. Evangelista recounts the moment. That evening, his first day on the job, His Excellency President Rodrigo Duterte picked up the microphone and let loose the dogs of war. The sons of bitches would die. They were destroying the nation and its children. Do not go into drugs, he said, because if you do, he will kill you. It might not be tonight, it might not be tomorrow, but it would happen, even if it took all of his 6-year term. He concluded with the haunting command, if someone's child is an addict, kill them yourselves, so it won't be so painful to the parents. That same night, an unidentified body was found just 5 minutes from where the president had spoken. A cardboard sign rested on his chest. It said, "I am a Chinese drug lord." From there, the violence only escalated. Duterte publicly declared, Hitler massacred 3 million Jews. Now there is 3 million drug addicts in the Philippines. I'd be happy to slaughter them. At least if Germany had Hitler, the Philippines would have me. You know my victims. I would like them to be all criminals, to finish the problem of my country and save the next generations from perdition. The president of the World Jewish Congress responded swiftly. These statements are revolting, and President Duterte must retract them and apologize. Drug use is a serious issue, but what President Duterte said is not only profoundly inhumane, it demonstrates an appalling disrespect for human life. One of the most chilling aspects of Duterte's regime was its language. Dehumanization often begins with euphemism. Evangelista writes, there are other terms for this: extrajudicial killing, vigilante-styled murder, targeted assassination. In the Philippines, a specific word evolved for this specific sort of death. The word is salvage. The irony is that salvage traditionally means to save. But under Duterte, it was twisted into a term for execution, justified killing. Salvation was no longer for the victim, but for the state. The killers left their victims on the streets, like cautionary billboards for journalists like Evangelista to document. The intent was not to hide the horror, but to display it. The message? This is what happens if you use drugs. Addicts became roadkill, dehumanized to the point that Duterte could claim a lot of them are no longer viable as human beings on this planet. In his view, they were beyond redemption, more suited for suicide than for sympathy. It didn't matter that Duterte's 3 million figure was pulled out of thin air. In reality, he exaggerated the number of drug users by over 1 million. Nor did it matter that most surveyed users in the Philippines weren't even using crystal meth, but marijuana, a drug that, while still illicit, tends to sedate rather than incite violence. Duterte's narrative depended on portraying drug users as ticking time bombs, fueled by meth and ready to lash out. Facts that contradicted this view were inconvenient, and inconvenient truths had no place in his presidency. Officials who pushed back were fired. Police officers who refused to comply found themselves reassigned to the most punishing shifts and the worst beats. The figure of 3 million wasn't based on actual national data, but on a loose application of a global statistic, that roughly 5.2% of the world's population uses illegal drugs. Duterte simply applied the number to the Philippine population, arriving at a total of 3.4 million drug users. It didn't matter that the context didn't translate or that his math was politically convenient. What mattered was that the number felt alarming. After all, in any country, if your government suddenly claims the number of drug users has doubled overnight, you're going to demand action, even if you've never seen it with your own eyes. The war officially began in July 2016 with the release of Command Memorandum Circular No. 16-2016. It was nicknamed Project Double Barrel. The police chief explained it with chilling metaphor. One touch of the barrel, 2 triggers will be set off. There's a barrel that will target from above high-value targets, and there's a barrel that will target from below, the street level. Police were emboldened. All they needed was the slightest justification to use lethal force. And quickly they realized what that really meant. There should be no witnesses. Dead suspects don't speak. They can't contradict the official story. Suddenly, drug users across the country were reported to have attacked the police first, pulling weapons despite officers' claims that they had only come to talk. It was as though thousands of addicts had simultaneously lost their minds. According to the president, this was entirely believable. Users of crystal meth, he said, had already destroyed their brains. Patricia Evangelista captures the absurdity far more powerfully than I can. She eloquently writes, "The Bulacan police chief, Police Colonel Romeo Karamat Jr., told the public that it's quite obvious that many of those killed are no longer in their right minds because instead of surrendering, like most of those arrested, they are inclined to fight it out with policemen." But then she notes the statistical improbability of that statement. There were no injured cops. There were no wounded suspects. To believe this narrative is to believe that local cops clocked a 100% kill rate, higher than the already improbable 97 reported by a Reuters investigative team in 2016, higher than the 83% of the notorious police shootings in Rio de Janeiro. And if they weren't murders, was every Bulacan policeman, including the rawest of recruits, a marksman of such astonishing talent that every random armed encounter was met with fatal accuracy? The flaw in Duterte's approach was that it relied on deterrence theory. On paper, the logic was simple. If the president of your country is authorizing police to hunt down drug users like animals, you probably won't start doing drugs. But here's the problem. Drug use isn't a rational decision. Most people who try drugs don't believe they'll get addicted. And the truth is, some people don't. Some can quit cold turkey and move on with their lives. The trouble is, you don't know which kind of person you are until it's too late. If you're one of the unlucky ones, genetically, emotionally, or circumstantially inclined to addiction, recovery is a long, painful road that not everyone survives. This same flaw plagues most deterrence-based policies. They depend on two things: the certainty of being caught and the severity of the punishment. But people don't always believe they'll be caught. Look at O.J. Simpson, found liable for the murder of his ex-wife and her friend, yet somehow acquitted in criminal court. Simpson had every reason to disappear from public life and count his blessings. But years later, he organized a robbery to retrieve stolen memorabilia. He didn't just plan the heist, he went along, armed with a pistol. Breaking and entering is serious enough. Doing so while armed significantly increases the penalty. He had time to think, to reconsider, yet he went vigilante style. He spent the next 9 years in prison. If deterrence theory worked, O.J. Simpson wouldn't have taken that risk. But deterrence fails because criminals, especially repeat ones, tend to believe they're the exception. That hubris, common to human nature, leads people to make deeply irrational decisions. In the Philippines, that meant people continued using drugs, even during Duterte's brutal crackdown, because addiction is not a problem you can scare out of someone. For many, life was already miserable. Drugs offered a temporary escape. That moment of relief felt worth the risk, no matter how deadly the odds. And in the end, the results proved what many experts had predicted. The crackdown did little to reduce the number of drug users nationwide. Evangelista writes, "A year into his presidency, the man who had promised no excuses made many that day. That the country was too much unlike the city of Davao, where he had succeeded in enforcing his own discipline. That his agencies were corrupt, that the country had no unity, that municipal mayors had been bought by drug lords, that the media was beating up on me, that the human rights community makes so much noise, that even the United States of America, as powerful as it was, had failed to solve the problems of drugs. That he had been working and killing and fighting, and still people complained." I could keep recounting the next 5 years of his presidency, but I'll instead point you to Patricia Evangelista's powerful exposé, "Some People Need Killing," which brings those individual stories to light in ways no summary ever could. It is truly an outstanding work of journalism. Suffice it to say, there are still drug users in the Philippines, roughly the same number as before. And yet, during Duterte's presidency, international rights groups documented at least 6,200 extrajudicial killings. Most experts believe the true number is far higher. The Philippine Commission on Human Rights estimates the number could be as high as 27,000. To this day, Rodrigo Duterte has not faced any punishment for the deaths tied to his time as mayor of Davao or as president of the Philippines. His 6-year term ended in 2022. And while I was relieved to see him step down peacefully, that relief was tempered by what followed. His daughter, who had succeeded him as mayor of Davao, was elected vice president. Her political ally? Fernando Marcos Jr., the son of the late dictator, who won the presidency on a platform that promised to continue many of Duterte's policies, including the drug war. Unsurprisingly, the war on drugs hasn't fared any better under Marcos, and in the summer of 2024, Sara Duterte abruptly resigned from her position. She's now rebranding herself as a change candidate. Rumors suggest that she, her two brothers, and even her father may run for Senate in the next election cycle. In the latest twist, Rodrigo Duterte has accused his former ally, President Marcos Jr., of being, yes, you guessed it, a drug addict. So what can we learn from this, particularly Americans who have borne witness to a similar level of dehumanization just of migrants rather than drug addicts? First, we must understand that dehumanizing any group of people can have real and deadly consequences. While I trust the institutions and norms of the United States to prevent the worst impulses of leaders or citizens who have, as the saying goes, drunk the Kool-Aid, we can never be entirely certain. Institutions only reveal their strength when tested. On January 6, 2021, the U.S. Capitol was attacked by individuals who believed the presidential election had been stolen from their chosen candidate. Capitol Police fought off the crowd for hours. Dozens of officers sustained long-term injuries. One protester was shot and killed, and several officers took their own lives in the aftermath. The National Guard was assembled but wasn't called in promptly. I believe most guardsmen would have done their duty, but can we be sure every single one of them would have? Undoubtedly, some shared the protesters' beliefs. Clearly, the institutions in the Philippines were not strong enough to resist the will of their democratically elected president. There was no mass resignation of police officers asked to kill with impunity. The judicial system did not hold them accountable, and the Congress failed to politically check Rodrigo Duterte. I would rather not find out if our American institutions would fare any better if faced with a president promising the nation's largest deportation ever, especially since we know that America's most massive deportation effort was the forced removal of indigenous nations from their ancestral lands, a tragedy both morally and humanely indefensible. These events can happen anywhere. Holocaust education exists to show the world the horrors of a bureaucracy unchecked by any system of accountability. Yet the vast scale of that tragedy, over 6 million systematically killed, leads many to believe that nothing similar could ever happen in their country. But when history teachers warn that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, we mean that future events, though perhaps smaller in scale, are still possible. History does not repeat in circles, it spirals. Patterns reduce, sometimes smaller, sometimes more widespread. The point is not only to prevent genocide, it is to prevent any system of state-sanctioned violence, however minor, from going unchecked. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. The voters of the Philippines didn't believe Rodrigo Duterte at his word. As he now attempts to return to power, the Filipino people must fully understand who and what they would be voting for. The same can be said for voters in the United States. At this point, we know that Donald Trump usually means exactly what he says. Democracy is powerful because it gives us choice. We choose our representatives, and when we're dissatisfied, we have non-violent avenues to influence policy. One of the easiest forms of influence lies in how we treat others, all people. The 2024 U.S. presidential cycle has been particularly grueling. For many Americans, especially those with relatives facing questions about their immigration status, the Trump presidency felt endless. But no matter how overwhelming it feels, we cannot afford to become numb to the rhetoric. In the Philippines, the daily rollout of Duterte's drug war from Davao to the entire nation desensitized much of its population. Journalists like Patricia Evangelista documented the bloodshed. She warns, slaughter dressed up in bureaucratese dulls the senses, and over time can numb an entire population to the horror happening right where they live. Objective reality is winnowed away by each succeeding government report. When this is allowed to happen, the dead perish again into non-existence. Drug addicts continue to use drugs under Duterte's regime, and migrants will continue to come to America, no matter how high we build our southern border wall. They come because they believe in the promise of a better life, just as the Puritans once did, followed by the Irish, Scots, Germans, Chinese, and Filipinos. Each wave of migrants has faced discrimination. The Irish and Germans were attacked by nativists. The Chinese were subjected to racist exclusionary laws. Filipinos were welcomed while their land was a U.S. colony, only to be shut out later in response to backlash. Today, the GOP demonizes migrants from the southern border. But we should remember, the only time immigration meaningfully declined was during the Great Recession, when Mexico's economy temporarily outpaced ours, prompting some undocumented Americans to head south for work. Although I've worked hard to sanitize Duterte's language throughout this show, I'll end with a word he and some American politicians have freely used. A word I find crude, but in this context necessary. Many who demonize migrants claim that they come from shithole countries. To them I say this: the motto of our nation, enshrined on the Statue of Liberty, calls upon us to welcome the tired, poor, and huddled masses yearning to breathe free. These people seek a better life and are willing to work for it. The solution is not to shut down immigration. It's to make it fairer, faster, and more humane. Migrants aren't going to turn America into a bleep hole country. Only we are capable of doing that. And if we do, the migrants will stop coming. I pray that never happens. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to interact with the show, you can email us at resourcesbylowery@gmail.com or find us on Bluesky beneath the handle EmpiresPod. If you would like to financially support the show, please look in the description for more information. As always, thank you for listening, rating the show, and spreading the word.